thanks, Sunir and everyone here. So the first time I got exposed to the small business web, which it was originally called in the Cloud Software Association, was at South by Southwest, I think 2010. So it's almost been a decade. And at that time, it was cloud was in its infancy, and many of the companies that are now have gone public or are large, their BD organizations were just the CEOs of the company. So in that room that Sunir was at, we had Rod Drury, the CEO of Xero. I think we had Mikkel from Zendesk. But it was this really small room of maybe 50 people who just had this idea around partnerships and cloud software and thinking of things differently. And over the last almost decade now, there's been a huge change in that cohort of SaaS companies and the impact that they've had not only on broader software, but on all industries across the board. So what I thought I'd do today is really think through what's the digital economy going to look like in the next 10 years, and what does that mean for this group in terms of the types of companies we partner with and the partnership opportunities that we can take hold. So really excited to share some specific context. Now, what I did for this assessment is we did a commissioned digital economy report to look at the cloud maturity of different industries and businesses. So I'm going to share some of those data and trends tied to this, but what I'm going to highlight is the evolution of the digital economy and what it is, then really examples or case studies of digital transformation in traditional industries that will help impact partnership opportunities for all of you, and then talk about how you can succeed through partnerships. So going back to that first Cloud Software Association event back in 2010 at South by Southwest, at the time, cloud was in its infancy, particularly SaaS, and that's when Box was probably Series B, FreshBooks, a lot of the names that now you'd say are bigger scaled players were pretty small. And overall, most of that market was dominated by Salesforce, but SaaS was about a $10 billion market, which has grown to over $72 billion. Then you layer on top of that the overall growth in cloud infrastructure and other activities. We've seen massive momentum in the scale and size of cloud, and it's opened up new ways and opportunities for all people to partner to take place in that and participate in that revenue. However, what we've seen over the last few years is that the digital economy, or particularly what we started in the cloud space, is taking over the traditional economy. So the way you used to think about a traditional business now really shifts, where what used to be seen as a hotel company could be Airbnb, or what you used to see as a physical good company could be in the cloud or online. So that really starts to make us think differently about the way we can partner. But what I wanted to share is not just these common use cases that we see in the consumer world that touch us every day, but use cases that are happening in other industries that are maybe more unconventionally not considered cloud software, that actually where I believe there will be a ton of partnership opportunity for each of you in the upcoming years. So when we look at the cloud today, it's a really massive market. But when we look at the broader digital service market as defined as digital services that have emerged from traditional businesses. So think about banking products, which you may have thought was a physical product, or insurance products. That would have been something that you interact with in person. But really, over the last decade, those in-person products have been built digitally, offered online, and now they're really operating just like a SaaS product would. So you can provision these services online. You can manage them with single sign-on. You can start enabling them to be resold or bundled with other services. So what we used to think of as a physical or traditional product is turning digital. And the landscape and the market opportunity for that is far greater than the cloud market that we're really talking about today. But that market's there today for each of you to take hold if you think about the way you're partnering in a slightly different way. So in this digital economy study, what we saw is we interviewed not only ISVs or SaaS companies, but companies and CEOs, CIOs of traditional companies like financial services industry, manufacturing, other groups, traditional software resell. And pretty much everyone believes that in the next 5 years, there's going to be a massive shift in digital transformation. And about 70% of the executives said this is going to disrupt the way we operate. and we're going to have to change. And when we looked at it by vertical, what we've seen is that while ISVs are very much so transformed, so I think most companies that traditionally offered CD software or licensed software now realize that cloud is going to be the predominant way that we distribute, so therefore we're going to move to the cloud. What we're finding is that actually other businesses like manufacturers, telecom companies, financial service industry is recognizing that they actually too need to transfer their essentially market enablement from a traditional service that may have been delivered offline, either shipped or delivered in person, all manual process, but they need to really automate not only the back office of the way they offer their products, but really the front office and the way that they have the customer interactions and touch points. So that presents huge opportunities for each of you. So I'm going to share some pretty fun use cases that I wouldn't have even imagined a few years ago would have existed. So a manufacturing plant looked like this 10, 15, 20 years ago. And essentially this was primarily mechanics that were driving the plant. And companies like ABB, for example, massive manufacturer, $140 billion market cap, would have made these manual arms that could enable you to manufacture a car or a computer or any type of service. So if they broke, it would have been like an old car. You have to call in the mechanic, you have to fix it manually, disconnected, very little software. So you'd think of this as something super traditional, old school. And why are we talking about this in the context of the Cloud Software Association? But really what's happened over the last decade is we've seen the manufacturing plant emerge. And what used to be mechanical is now not only computer operated, but also through SIM cards and redundancies. What we're finding is that all these devices are becoming connected. And all these devices are now starting to have app stores or forms of app lifecycle management where services can be pushed to the device, and therefore an ecosystem can be built around this device to speed manufacturing cycles. So this specific use case is one with ABB, a manufacturer that took those old arms that I showed you, computer-enabled them by offering, over the last decade, a software tool called Robot Studio, in which people could use that software to test and build in a sandbox capability that would allow the arm to manufacture new things faster. So in the past, you'd have to physically, if you wanted to build a new supply chain, you need to manufacture a new arm. But with Robot Studio, it would allow you to download new software so you could change the configuration of the car that you want to build or the different ways the robot is working. Now, what's super cool is just in the last year or two, what we're finding is that those robot arms are becoming connected. There's app stores that can be deployed on them, and therefore you can push services to these arms that speed product life cycles. And when we think about ecosystems, what they're doing in terms of servicing is doing a lot of things that have a huge impact on the way cars and other equipment are being manufactured. So what really is cool about this is now in that robot arm, it might be using about 10 different pieces of software from different vendors to help manufacture that car. And what you have is this ecosystem of ISVs, or a new form of software vendors that need to build software that can be provisioned onto the robot arm, that can be tested in these models in Robot Studio in advance. So essentially, within an instant, these new services can be pushed onto the manufacturing plant. It's already been pre-tested, and right away they can start manufacturing in a new way because of a capability that an ISV enabled. And what we would have thought is that these ISVs would have to be very specialized, but what we're finding is in examples like cars or TVs or others, they want to be able to embed telematics or infotainment services. So you could take a company like Netflix, who I believe we have someone speaking right after this, and Netflix could be pushing capabilities right onto the dash of the car, and other companies that are managing telematics, so let's say thinking through fleet management or tracking, could be testing and deploying this in here too. So again, what we think of as traditionally cloud software is now dramatically expanding. So another example is radiology. So this was an X-ray back 10 years ago. Many people may still see a machine like that. In fact, I actually fractured my foot earlier this month, which was not too fun. But in order to test it, I needed to go to the doctor, get a referral. They need to send it to the radiology team. So the problem was it was my right toe here that was broken, but they sent, or left toe, but they sent the referral for the right toe. So I went into the radiology department, waited in line for however long. Turns out it was the wrong toe. They had to then call my doctor. The doctor wasn't available. I had to leave. They had to order the new x-ray. I had to go back. Kind of whole, 2 days went by when I was stubbing my toe consistently. It was really bad. Then anyway, so I show up to the doctor's office or the radiologist department. Finally, they scan my foot. And then they say, okay, we're going to fax this to your doctor, and they'll probably receive it in 2 to 3 days and then look at it and get back to you. And I was like, fax? Are you serious? And so I called my doctor. I'm like, it's already been 2 days. What do I do? They're like, ask them for a CD. So I literally asked them, well, can you burn me a CD? And they're like, oh, yeah, of course. So they give me a physical CD. I put it in my vest. Again, I haven't used a CD in 5, 10 years. I go then to the doctor's office or the chiro's office that then had to go find like a computer in the back room, read the CD, give me the results. But then 2 days later, they finally got the fax. So that whole life cycle was like a week of disaster where my foot was hurting. I was really continuing to make it worse. But who would have thought that that would exist in the world today? Just doesn't make any sense. But it does. So again, similarly, the group here, with the way that we enable cloud software, can totally help streamline that experience. So when we think about the idea of automating a referral, that can turn into an app that's enabled on an app store that can be deployed directly to the radiology department, where that referral is going right to the equipment. And we're seeing that with GE and other organizations are creating, again, connected equipment that have SIM cards embedded on them, lifecycle management tools, so you can have app services and areas deployed. So that could have taken this referral process where I could go online, approve it to the doctor, push it to the radiologist instantly. And if it was ordered for the wrong foot, again, they could have instantly fixed that. Then on the other side, you have the reality is that and I didn't know this again until this, the supply chain for faxing things is very prevalent in the medical community. And while there's new online tools, fax is still a normal requirement. But you can use eFax and SaaS tools like that to automate the faxing process, so it's essentially done and transmitted online so the doctor can instantly have that. So again, something that could have been a very painful one-week process, used a lot of offline tools, cost a ton of money in the supply chain, and a terrible customer experience, can be transformed through SaaS tools instantly. And many of you in the room can think through those opportunities and models. Think about banking, last example that I'll give. Again, the experience of banking products is still, even though you have more online tools and you can go online, to open up a bank account, you still physically have to go in. For certain insurance products, they've created new online ways. So I was going through the process of getting health insurance, medical insurance, different kinds. But life insurance, thank you, there we go. And the life insurance policy, you kind of went online, you filled out info. It was like a pretty cool experience, but then they had to send me the red, yellow, pink forms and still physically drive that as part of their flows. And while you see DocuSign and other e-signature being adopted, there's still this old school approach, again, in the back end, that's slowly being evolved through technology. So you look at some new services and banking services where the bank has been transformed. There's online consumer services, but the back-end manual services still exist in a lot of the insurance applications in the non-consumer world. And what banks are trying to do, again, is securely open up new capabilities so people can add value and automate in the banking and insurance world. And that's something as simple as taking an old workflow and bringing that online and creating that as an app. So what we're finding is more and more banks now are saying, instead of them building closed flows, they want to open up their problems to ISVs that can create cash management tools or visual insight tools for specific verticals and use cases. So again, the idea of the Microsoft App Store, which we were even saying has just really evolved over the last 4 years with the Azure App Store, makes sense. It's software. It would be a good evolution, right? But for a lot of people, we haven't been thinking about, what about a SaaS app store for cars, for manufacturing, for financial services? But that's really becoming the reality today. And similarly, as we've seen the types of verticals transform, what we're also seeing is that the traditional partnership models are now evolving as well. So many of us have talked a lot over the last 10 years in this group, including today, about affiliate models, referral models, resell models. Jose shared Microsoft's evolution of that, including indirect models, direct selling models. But what we're seeing is that there's been a huge disruption of those partnership models with the cloud, but even more so with the way the cloud is evolving with new industries and use cases. So we've talked a lot about app stores, ecosystems. The whole idea of SaaS Connect was built around APIs and how we could think automating. But what we're finding more and more is the way that you can share information isn't just defined as a SaaS tool or an application itself. It could be a data set. It could be something that's embedded onto an IoT device. It could be a new way of thinking about a digital solution where you take hardware, software, connectivity, you bundle it together, and then you go sell that value proposition in market. So for example, one of the use cases that we're seeing in partnership opportunities that's driving great workflow is independent value-added resellers that say, okay, I'm going to take Zoom, I'm going to take a Polycom system, and I'm going to take a coax agreement with Comcast Business, and I'm going to package them together, and I'm going to go create the best town hall system that anyone's ever created. And for those of you in the room who are SaaS companies, most of you probably see the pains as you evolve with managing the town hall process. But this VAR can be very specific on selling this town hall solution. And we're seeing more and more of that occurring, where the combination of not just selling software with software, but selling software with hardware, IoT, connectivity, manufacturing, insurance is creating totally new ways that we can partner and enable for success. So one takeaway here is, depending where you are in your partnership maturity, thinking through who in the value chain are other companies that could work with you, not just necessarily for distribution, but from enabling a better customer experience. So if you're in cloud software and you realize, let's say it's geared toward legal as a vertical that you're really seeing, think through what other law firms are buying and how they're buying that. That could be things as simple as records. It could be physical products. It could be connectivity. It could be internet. Think about ways that you can cross-sell and build solutions that add value to those vertical segments. And that creates, again, a whole new world for the way that we can think about partnering. So kind of an interesting thing in our study that we found is that most people are recognizing that it's about the ecosystem that will enable this. So again, us in the software vertical, we're very familiar with the idea of ecosystems, app stores. So most people recognize this is the way we have to operate. But what we're seeing is, manufacturing, which in its nature was a closed experience. You would never have partnership opportunities or open ecosystems. But now people are seeing, we not only need to transform to compete against, let's say, Nest, which has an open ecosystem, but we have to take it a step further, where we have to make sure all of our types of business units, whether it's aerospace or defense or government, which previously were, again, very closed off to the idea of ecosystems, they're all saying now, how do we create secure ecosystems? How do we think about cultivating a community of partners that could be software-based that can help speed our cycles, add more value? So that is a huge momentum. And when we looked at this years back, telecom and ISV was definitely kind of on the precipice of saying, okay, we know we have to build ecosystems, but we have to mature to that. But the idea of a manufacturer ever thinking about an open ecosystem was crazy at the time. So we've come a long way. Financial services is another example where, even though theoretically a lot of banks, insurance companies see value in opening up to other partners, there was too much risk in years past. But now they've created secure models in which they can partner and test with different software vendors to create new experiences. And what's interesting is it's not playing out the same way that it would in the cloud marketplace at a Salesforce App Exchange or SAP App Store or Microsoft App Store. It's panning out very differently in manufacturing and financial services, where it's a whole new cohort of ISVs, or they're asking and looking at ISVs that have big brand names to create specific SKUs or products for these use cases. So the long and the short of it is, if you're only talking about partnering with other SaaS companies, you're really missing out on the broader ecosystems that will emerge. And really starting to pay attention to these new emerging ecosystems, I think, is a huge opportunity for you. Not only that, what we're seeing is that of these businesses that are embarking on digital transformation, so many manufacturers and telecoms, they really see themselves as already on this digital journey. So again, this isn't something that they're saying in 10 years we might have an ecosystem. This is something saying we have an initiative for an ecosystem, we're testing with these 10 vendors, and we want to open up. So there are people who are having these conversations, and whether it's within the AppDirect ecosystem and at our conferences, or whether it's in other groups, we can get you connected with banks, financial services, manufacturers, and others that are innovating in similar ways that we innovate here within the software vertical. So I think that this was a really interesting transition where over the last 10 years, we've shifted from the small business web because we saw that the value of SaaS was not just about servicing small business needs, it's servicing all types of software needs. So we were rebranded as the Cloud Software Association. But I think that this same group, again, is going to open up to do so much more, which could go beyond just thinking about traditional software, but it could be really enabling digital transformation of tons of different industry models, ranging from banking to manufacturing to software to telco and others. So really excited about what this room can do and how we'll continue to evolve. So thank you very much and really appreciate sharing that with you.
I always love having you speak. You have such a future view of what the industry can do.
Thanks, Nick.
So one of the thing that, talking about the idea of taking our skills as partnership people into new verticals like manufacturing or medicine is part of what we're doing even here today at SaaS Connect and talking about that. AppDirect has gone through a journey. How did you even break through and talk to a manufacturer? How did that conversation even happen?
Yeah, so what we started on in evolution is we saw that SaaS companies could be distributed. And we had this really vision of how do we bring SaaS to the world. And at first, it was looking at what are other aspects of the channel? Is it the distributors that Jose was talking about? Is it the telecoms that wanted to be able to sell other services? And that, at the time, I think made somewhat sense. It was still a leap because the idea of taking a small organization, enabling it to be partnered with a large organization, especially one that didn't understand cloud models, was super tough. So in the early days, we had to negotiate with these massive companies, long sales cycles, didn't understand the cloud, and it was super painful. But we built a muscle in our ecosystem in terms of how to do that. So how do you break into a company that normally wouldn't partner with someone smaller and doesn't have the experience or latitude to do so? And I think a lot of that was partnering on vision and showcasing, here's where the world is going, here's how you can take part in that opportunity, and how do we create partnership models where we can innovate. So the trick that I've found, and we've shared this in the past, and I think similar discussions have been had here, is how do you take a big company but break it down to one person in an innovation unit that can start a pilot project that is encouraged to fail and experiment, and then as that succeeds, it gets sucked into the core. So what we saw with a lot of our early agreements is we'd start as an innovation model or experiment, it would be sucked into core, and then they scale it across the organization. So similarly, maybe 4 years back, a lot of the car manufacturers started saying, okay, well, we want an ecosystem for infotainment in our car. Jaguar was one of our first clients that engaged with that. And then from there, we realized, oh, they want it for telematics reasons. Then we saw across their supply chain, actually manufacturers want that. So what we've seen is almost demand inbound, that as you look at the digital economy and what SaaS is doing, almost every company is now trying to experiment. So we're still getting really excited about looking at the next frontier and really reimagining what the traditional businesses could look like in the cloud.
It's so crazy when you mentioned how we started with Mikkel and Rod way back when open APIs were a crazy idea. And now we're taking our partnership skills into new industries. Like, there's so much opportunity for us as partnership managers to grow our careers in new interesting spaces. So I love that story. Questions for Daniel? Oh, do we have any? Of course, I can ask another one. All right, so what are the biggest challenges? This is my thing. subscriptions are really hard to resell. So how are people going to market? Like, it's still a very difficult channel.
Yeah.
So how do people solve it?
Sure. So what we found is twofold. So one of the things that we found is that a digital marketplace alone is not necessarily where a lot of the sales or revenue comes from. It's from the sales and enablement and direct sellers and indirect sellers and inside sales and thinking through the go-to-market notions. So I think the idea that we maybe initially had 10 years ago was through APIs and online selling, people are just going to sell products online and it's just going to work. What we found is that in general, sales and marketing is a huge part of how we all sell. And you see that in most SaaS companies that are going public, they're still spending 50% plus, sometimes 80%, 100% of their revenues on sales and marketing. So that's no different with the channel. So thinking through how you can effectively invest for growth in your partnership models is super important. But I think in some of these future opportunities, what we're finding is that embedded solutions is a whole nother world. So it's not just about getting a third party to resell your SKU as is, but it's actually embedding your services in their service offerings. So if you think about the example I gave with Robot Studio in manufacturing, ABB can sell specific robot arms that are pre-sold and embedded with ISV tools that have been created as part of that price. So if you think about kitting out a whole manufacturing plant, that's potentially a $100 million, multiple billion-dollar project. So those companies would actually want to buy some of these SaaS tools up front and just embed them for free. So your revenue model isn't dependent on the resell, it's just embedded onto that device. So I would say that in addition to co-sell and resell models, definitely think creatively about how you can embed yourself in other technologies, and I think we'll see that a lot in other traditional industries.
Thank you so much.
Quick question. Do you see business models evolving within industries? So you listed several industries up there on your slide a couple of times with telecom, manufacturing, FinServ, HLS. Do you see the models changing at all within those industries? Do you have to be kind of agile as you start to work within those industries as a SaaS provider or even a service provider like yourself?
Definitely. So I think what we've seen is that there's a maturity curve in the SaaS partnership model, and that's something that's been spoken a lot about at these conferences, which is if you're a Series A SaaS company, you might start with a freemium model. Then Series B, you're going to build your own sales force. And there's a maturity required to be able to invest in full-scale partnership models. And some of the biggest companies in the world, like a Microsoft, can invest in very complex channel programs. But if you're a growing SaaS company, you have to wait for the right level of maturity to be able to drive that partnership. And I think we're seeing that as traditional businesses are transforming to digital businesses, there's that similar maturity curve of the type of partnerships that they can engage with. And oftentimes that's very unique based on that industry. So for example, telecom providers have been really good at triple play. So the most effective strategy for them was bundling a service with their core services. Whereas other VARs could be better at selling more solution-oriented services. In the manufacturing or in like the medical world, it's going to be a totally different workflow. So I'd say that it goes down to the maturity of the industry and their digitization and their channel. So I would say that from the data that we shared, right, typically SaaS maturity is going to be the highest. So SaaS companies can be built to do this through APIs. So it's probably the easiest once there's maturity. And then you'd probably shift to other recurring business models, like a telecom provider that's used to the recurring relationship with their customer. And then you start to get further away when it's people who have never worked with recurring models, ecosystems, partners. That's when they have to build that muscle from scratch.
All right. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thanks, everyone. Great to see you.
Thank you.